Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to talk about how to use GitHub Actions to deploy resources in Azure. But before we get into that, let's talk about the main components involved in the CI/CD pipeline, which I'll be referring to during this whole demonstration. The first component is GitHub Actions. Let's understand what GitHub Action is. It is a continuous integration and continuous delivery platform that allows you to automate your build, test, and deployment pipeline. You then create workflows which utilize multiple GitHub actions to build, test, and deploy as per your requirement. Workflows can be triggered manually or automatically, as well as based on certain events happening in your repository, which includes code push to a branch, creating a pull request, and many more. I'll link the GitHub documentation in this video description, which you can refer to read all the events that can trigger a workflow. Second main component is ARM templates. ARM templates is nothing but JSON file that defines the infrastructure and configuration for your project. The template uses declarative syntax, which lets you state what you intend to deploy without having to write the sequence of programming commands to create it. In the template, you specify the resources to deploy and the properties for those resources. Obviously, the third and fourth component being Azure and GitHub itself. So let's start looking at how these components fit into a pipeline. As you can see on my screen, you make changes to the local copy of your repository. Once you have made the changes, you push them to your remote repository, which in our case would be github.com. This repository would be listening to certain events based on your requirement. In my case, I'll be using a push event. So as soon as the code is pushed to main branch, the GitHub action will get triggered in background. And what it will do is, it is configured to deploy resources in Azure. In our case, I have chosen app service for the demonstration. So as soon as the action is triggered and authenticated, it will use the action workflow in background to trigger the deployment. Okay. So this is my GitHub public repository. You can refer to this repository to understand the code that I'll be going through in this demonstration. And if you have any doubts, you can post them in the comment section and I'll try to answer them as quickly as possible. So for deploying a resource to Azure using GitHub Actions, you need at least 3 GitHub Actions that are there on my screen. You can have more than this, but a bare minimum is these 3 actions. So the first action that you'll be using is the checkout action. So what checkout action does is, it checks out your repository in which your workflow is hosted and your ARM templates are hosted on the agent, which is going to do things in background for you. So when an action gets triggered, it needs an agent in the background to execute the workflow. The agents are offered by GitHub. These range from a Mac agent, a Windows agent, or a Linux agent. You specify this thing in your workflow file, that which agent you want to use for your execution, which we will shortly look when we are going through the code base. So yeah, once you have configured the checkout action, the next action that you need to configure is Azure login action. So Azure login action, what it's doing. So basically, to deploy something to Azure, the first thing you need to do is authenticate yourself. So this action is going to authenticate using your credentials to Azure portal to do the deployments. Now, as part of configuration, or probably I would say prerequisites, you'll have to generate certain credentials and save them as repository secrets in GitHub, which we will go through later in this demonstration. Once you have configured your login action, the third one is deploy Azure Resource Manager template action. This action, as its name indicates, once you have authenticated to Azure, this will utilize your utilize your ARM template and the parameter files to trigger the deployment in Azure. These all three actions are marketplace actions available for consumption. You can always go to these actions documentation to understand the actions more and how they are used. And these actions will pretty much clearly have any dependencies listed as well. For example, on your screen, you can see the ARM template action has dependencies on the login and checkout. That's the reason why I say for deploying resources to Azure using GitHub, you need a bare minimum of 3 actions. So once you have these 3 actions sorted, you can start doing the deployment. So in my case, as I said, we are going to create a app service. So there is a workflow which I have in my code base, which is called as web app creation, which will get triggered whenever there is a change in parameter file for that ARM template, which is called as app-service.parameters.json in our case. So why I have limited this to just change in one file? Reason being, your code and your parameter file, everything is hosted in one repository, and you wouldn't want to trigger your action whenever there is any change made in the whole repository. Let's say you are making some enhancement to the code base and you wouldn't want the action to trigger at that time. That's the reason why this has been limited to just execute when there is a change in the parameter file only. Now, going forward, as I said, there are some prerequisites before you can even deploy in Azure. The first thing is to generate your deployment credentials. And how you do that? You need to log in into the Azure portal. You can do it using Azure CLI. Just log in into the Azure portal, use the Azure Cloud Shell, and the command is mentioned on your screen. There will be few parameters that you'll have to replace in this. Basically, what this command is doing, it's basically creating a RBAC role-based access control, to which will grant your credentials to deploy things in the Azure portal. You need to replace the subscription ID with the subscription ID of your subscription, and then which resource group you are trying to deploy into. So these are the 3 portions that you'll have to update before you can execute this command. Once you have generated the um, credentials for the deployment, you need to configure those credentials in GitHub. And how you do it? Basically, you need to go into your repository settings and create 3 secrets, which will correspond to the resource group where your resource will be created, your subscription, which will be used for deploying resources, and your Azure credentials. So what you'll have to do is basically um, your Azure credential secret needs to have the whole JSON output, which was generated when you ran this command. So your whole content, output content, you'll have to paste in the Azure credential section. Then the second is Azure_RG. So the 3 credentials, or I would say the 3 secrets that you are going to create in GitHub need to have the exact same names. You cannot change the names. Obviously, the values will change based on every person's subscription and those sort of things. But the name of the secrets remains same. So Azure_RG is the name of the resource group where you are going to deploy your app service or the Azure resources. Azure_subscription is your subscription ID. So you need to have these things ready before triggering your deployment. Now, once you have these, you'll have to update the parameter file. As I was saying, my trigger is configured whenever a change is pushed in the main branch, exclusively in the app service parameter JSON file. So the Parameters that you can update in the parameter file are the web app name. It can be any name. You need to make sure that the name is unique globally. Then it's app service plan name. Then which version of like what is the supported uh, configuration for your app service, whether you want to run a Python app service, you want to run a .NET Core, you want to run Node, you want to run Java, then you need to specify the SKU. Now, these are very Azure specific. These values, like P1, V2, P1, V3, you'll have to read the Azure documentation to understand what you are getting when you use this SKU code. And then you'll have to specify the SKU tier, which is, I have limited it to just premium version 2 in our case. So this is just limited. I have made these limitations in my case because I don't want, probably I would say I want to limit my users to create anything outside of these parameters. So you do have options to create many more type of app services in Azure, but in my case, I have limited to just these options. There can be a SKU code named P3 V1. There can be many. So these are not just for obviously if you are looking to change code based on your requirements, you need to refer to Azure documentation to understand what more options are available. Okay. So let's look at the workflow file first, where we have defined what is happening in background. So for GitHub workflow files, you need to be aware that the workflow file can always needs to remain in the .github this location. This is where GitHub knows that any action code is hosted. So whenever you create actions, this is the standard folder structure that you'll have to follow. Okay, so let's look at the workflow code. Basically, if you look at line 2, I'm defining here that my workflow will get triggered on a push event, and I'm limiting it to main branch. So if you are pushing changes to, let's say, any feature branch, e even though if you don't have any limitation on the path, this workflow will not get triggered because it is configured to trigger on push in a main branch. And then I have limited the path as I was saying. So on the main path, if there is change only in the app-service.parameter.json, then only this will get triggered. If in main branch there is any other file that is modified, it will not get triggered. Then the next thing on line 7, it's the name of the workflow. Web app creation is what I have named it. Now I'm configuring the job, basically the steps that this workflow will perform in background. So this build and deploy is nothing but just the name of the workflow. It runs on Ubuntu latest. This is what I was referring to at the start of this video, that you get 3 flavors of the GitHub runners. The first one is Windows, second one is Mac, third is Linux. So I'm using a flavor of Linux, which is Ubuntu latest in our case. You can use Windows as well or Mac OS, but obviously every agent has different billing concept. The Mac OS is more costlier than as compared to Ubuntu. So I prefer to use Ubuntu as it gets my work done and I don't get charged for a lot of minutes as well because the billing is based on minutes. Okay, so the next one is I'm configuring these steps. So the first one step is, if you see, checkout. So what I'm doing is just utilizing the marketplace action, which is readily available to check out my code. Then what I'm doing is I'm using the Azure login action to log in into Azure. And what I have done is I have specified that you need to use this credential, which I created and configured as a secret in this repository. which we will see shortly on how it was configured. Because if you have not configured this secret, then when this workflow gets triggered, it will just fail, saying that not able to authenticate. Now, after this, what you do is you are using the third action to deploy the ARM template. Basically, this is what I was talking at the start. It is again a marketplace action, and when you are executing, you are telling it that this is the subscription ID, this is the resource group name, this is the template it needs to use, and this is the parameter file it needs to use. And at the end, we are just echoing what is the container that got created. Again, you need to make sure that you have created these GitHub secrets. If you have not, this action will fail. Let's say you just created your credentials, you forget to create these two. So when your workflow runs, your login will still be successful, but the third part of the workflow will fail because it will not be able to find these secrets. So once you have this workflow file ready, let's go back to the parameter and ARM templates to look more before we head to the actual demo. So the actual ARM template is kept under SRC folder, app-service.json, and the parameter file is kept outside. This has been done intentionally because most of the time the changes would be in the parameter file, which is outside. So let's first look at the ARM template itself. So ARM template is just following the standard conventions on how it's created. I won't go into a lot of details of the ARM templates at this point, but if you are interested in learning how ARM templates are created, you can always post them in the comment section and I can come up with a detailed video on that as well. So it has a bunch of parameters where this ARM template is expecting that the user who is going to create the app service will supply the web app name, which is here. Then it is also expecting the plan name, and these are the versions. You see, now I have used the concept of allowed values. That is the reason I have limited my template to just 4 options. Azure allows you to create much more than this, but I have hard coded it to just limit it. Basically, organizations do this to make sure that the compliance policies are followed. You can have certain compliance policies where you're not allowed to deploy in any region, or you are not allowed to deploy any type of service. So that is how you limit using the ARM templates. Again, bunch of standard things where I have just limited to few options. And then this is the actual code which is going to create the app service in background. Cool. So the next thing is let's see how the secrets are created before we head to the actual demo. So you'll go to the settings of your repository, go to secrets, click actions. Here you'll create your secrets. So these are the 3 secrets I have created, which are referred in my action. So again, Azure_RG is your resource group name where you are going to deploy the resource. Then Azure_subscription is your subscription ID, and Azure_credential is the whole JSON, which gets generated when you run the Azure login command. Cool. So now let's head to a small demo where I'll be making a code change to trigger the workflow and see the actual creation of the app service. So this is the code base I have, which is cloned on my local. For the sake of this demo, I'll just probably make a slight change where I'll be deploying a .NET Core 3.0 app service. So what change will be? I'll just change the value of the Linux FX version from Java Tomcat to .NET 3.0. So let's commit it. Yeah, the commit is made. Let's push it to the remote repository. Yep. Let's go to GitHub. So let's refresh it. Now, if you see, there is a brown dot next to your repository, which denotes that there is a action that has got triggered. Let's go to this action. Okay. So what it's doing is Azure, the code checkout has already been done because it's on second step where it's trying to do an Azure login. Once the login is done, it will trigger a deployment. It can sometimes take time. So you have to be a bit patient. Yep. So kind of it was doing its work in background, but it was not showing us the progress. If you see, it just completed now. Um, Everything has been done here. If you look, it was able to log in. It says login successful. Then in the run ARM deploy, it's changing the subscription, creating deployment. And if we go back now, let's go to the Azure portal to see the actual stuff that would have happened in background. So here I am in Azure portal. If you see, here is a .NET Core demo app service that has got created. Uh, if you look at this, it's the Linux operating system which is running in background, and the app service plan is GitHub GH action plan. Um, it's running at the moment, and yeah, that's on high level. If we go back to our template, this was the plan name that we had given, and this is the version which we had chosen, P1 V2. Let's go back to it. You see, in the parameters we had chosen P1 V2, and yeah, GH action plan, and the .NET Core was its name. Let's try to browse this app service to make sure it has come up successfully. Yep, your web app service is running and waiting for your content. This pretty much confirms that the app service has got deployed successfully. And if you see, it's also telling you that it's built with .NET Core. Now you can go and build your code and deploy to, which is altogether a separate process, because this demonstration was just limited to how you create it. But if you want to deploy your code to the app service, it's entirely a different process. You'll have to configure. If you are using your Visual Studio Code for development, you'll have to configure your Visual Studio Code uh, and do the deployment. So I think that's it I wanted to cover in this demo. Before we are done, I'll probably just show you one more thing where I wanted to show you how it will look like if you forget to create your uh, repository secrets. This was intentional that I didn't create because I wanted to show what the error message comes when you forget to create the GitHub secret. So in this case, I didn't create the login credentials. So it complained about the CLI login failed. Please check the credentials and make sure AG is initialized on the runner. For more information, you can go to this link. So yeah, your whatever error you get in GitHub workflow, it will be very self-explanatory. You won't have to muck around a lot. You'll be able to understand it and go about it. You'll not find it very much difficult to troubleshoot. Yeah, that's it for this demo. I hope you liked it. If you have liked the content, please subscribe to my channel, hit the bell icon so you're notified of my new content. Thank you.